Hey there, YouTube. I've gotten a lot of comments and questions about how I upgrade these little toy outboards. I'm going to say right now, sorry for having to listen to the water run in the back of the video. It's my fish tank. Can't really turn it off. So, I guess we'll start with this, which is a Scott Outboard I just got. Pretty nice motor, in pretty good shape. They run okay. I know there are people who are purely collectors who are going to maybe not be the happiest with this video. However, I like to run and use these motors on remote control boats. It's fun, it kind of adds to the realism of them. They look really good, so when you get them on a model boat, it's a really nice look when you have it out there running. So, the first things that I did with this motor is when I got it, I ran it off a regular pack of 4 AA's, and you'll probably see that. I might put a video previous to this intro that you guys will see. So, took the hood off, and this is the motor that comes in it. It's got little brush tabs, nothing special. They're really unbalanced. They're really just wrapped with wire for the sake of getting them going. Not very powerful, not very fast at all. But at the time I could see them being very cool. So this motor came out, and this motor is the motor that's going to go in. This is a brushless motor, 1000 kV. I'm going to run it off 2 cells because you really can't push the outboard too hard. It's got brass gears. It doesn't take a whole lot of stress well. So you kind of get it to the point where you can just get it up on plane, and that's about it. You're really not trying to push it. You're not trying to make some crazy speeds. But so this motor, for those of you that don't know, is a brushless outrunner. There are all these coils on the inside, if you can see them. And basically what it does, in the simplest way to put it, is it digitally tells each of these coils to charge, and then there's a bunch of magnets on the inside of this housing and pulls it around. So there are no brushes, there's less friction, and for this setup these do really well. They're really common in model airplanes because the prop helps cool them, but in this setup you're really not putting it under too much of a load. So this is what we'll be putting in. Now, what's neat is the mounting holes are pretty much the same. So we should be able to mount this motor directly through the original mounting holes here. Now we are going to have to modify a couple things. And the first thing that we're going to have to do is we're going to take the switch out, because A, we're not going to need it anymore. It's kind of irrelevant at this point. And you can't get the motor on there with it on. It's going to hit it. The motor's going to end up sitting too high, then you won't be able to get the hood on. So for this particular outboard, we're going to have to take the switch out. I've noticed in most of them you will have to take the switch out to do this. The other things that we're going to do is, so this is the drive dog in here. I don't know if you can see it. I'll try and get a better view, which fits the original motor. So those are actually really just a hex or a cross that they put on there, and then they kind of just peened over the end and hammered it on. So if you were to try and run this motor off this setup, it's eventually going to spin that, and it won't, then it won't turn the prop or anything. So we will be taking that off. The whole shaft does come out. This screw here allows you to take the whole shaft out. And then you could take the prop off, the prop nut, and then the lower unit. And we're going to take the lower unit apart because the way they work is the gear comes down in the front here, and then you have a crown gear on the back side. So if this prop is under too much pressure, it's separating that gear mesh in the lower unit. So what I use to do that is they make these little shim kits, and we'll be able to put them on the back side of that gear. Now these shim kits are for a gearbox, for an airsoft gun, for an electric airsoft gun. People shim their gearboxes. So they have these and they come in a variety of different sizes. Usually they're not very expensive. And for this application they work really well, I feel like. They also alleviate some of that friction of this gear hitting that hub in the back of this lower unit. So the other thing that we're going to have to do is, we have this motor, and it's got a pretty long shaft on it. We also have to come up with a way to connect it to the shaft in there. So this is what I've done. This is a different motor. This is a higher power motor for a different project, so we're not going to use that on this project. But I've cut a slit in the motor, in the shaft, as you can see. And then I use just a little locking ring with an Allen key in it, and it helps hold that shaft in there, so that way it doesn't wobble one way or the other, in and out. So it works pretty well. And then that kind of helps with our next issue of what we do when we take the drive shaft out. We're going to take it out and we're going to pop off this little hex end in here, and then all we're going to do is just take a file and file it down flat so that it'll sit right inside that motor. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll come back to another video. Alright, so we have the drive shaft out now. That's going to be a little hard to see. Basically, the T on the end of this shaft we're going to take off, and I'm just holding the shaft itself with some vice grips, and you can see I can take my other set of pliers and I can just turn this extremely freely. So that's why I'm saying you got to take this off, because if you don't take it off, the power from that motor is just going to spin this and you're going to be out of luck pretty quick. Try and get that to focus a little better. So we're just going to spin this and we're going to take it right off. I'm going to do it over here so I don't hit the camera. Alright, so that's the T that we took off. And now I'm going to take the drive shaft out of these little vice grips. So now that's the top of the drive shaft. So you can see all they did was press fit it on. I mean, it was put on originally. Now, the gear on the bottom side, so these gears in this, they don't look the worst. I mean, they definitely all have wear on them because of the age of these little outboards and the fact that those gear cases are so loose. The end of the gear, so these are also press fit on. So it tends to happen that this shaft will spin and slip in this gear. When that happens, you got to take the gear off, and you can try and take a hammer to the end of the shaft a little and flatten it a little more, get it to sit better in this gear. This one's not spinning right now, so we should be fine. It does happen, sometimes it doesn't happen. There wasn't really any quality control. And here's the gear for the lower unit. It looks real nice. So that's kind of how it sits in the motor. And we'll be putting our washer on the back side right here. This is the nut that you take off when you go to take the lower unit apart. I'll try and show that real quick. So that shaft goes inside there. This nut caps this end. There are tools to take it apart. I just use a little flathead screwdriver to get the one side of it and then spin it. And then once you get it spinning, you should be able to get it out pretty easy. The other thing is, so the prop is threaded. It threads onto that shaft. Now sometimes, depending on the motor, they all have a little nut behind the prop to kind of help lock it down. Sometimes I take this nut off because this nut is so small and there's not a lot of thread to it. Even if you use thread lock on it, it can loosen up, and if it loosens up, it's going to push against that hub, and then it'll lock up that lower unit, and you will spin something, or you could totally destroy the gear case. You know, there's no way to tell. So usually what I do is I shim that lower shaft, and then when I put my prop on, I put it on with a little like blue Loctite so you can get it off again, but just so it doesn't go anywhere, you don't have to worry about it unthreading. The other thing I should mention is, so depending on your brushless motor, like I run these 1000 kV. Like here's the numbers. These are real cheap. They're not real expensive. Really cheap to buy. You can look up these numbers on like eBay or something, and this motor will show up. So they have 3 wires, so you can't run them directly off a battery. You have to use a speed control. So this is the speed control I'm going to be using. It's going to get you know, the end soldered on, and then an end soldered on for the battery, and then it has another wire on it that's going to go to a receiver for my remote control system. It's actually pretty easy. It's not anything too crazy. Yes, it can be expensive depending on what you want to buy. The battery we're going to use, I don't really have one. We're going to just use a 2-cell. So it'll be a battery like this. This is a pretty big battery, so we're probably not going to use this with this motor. I have smaller ones, but it's just 2 cells. It's 7.4 volts, so you can see that right there, 7.4. Anything higher, it's a lot of power for these motors. Sometimes you're just pushing them way too hard. You can also see now, I took the switch off the back. So now when we go to put our motor on, it'll fit right in there. It'll fit, should go just like that. And it'll fit nice and flush with the rest of the system. We should be able to screw it back in. We'll see if the original screws fit. Sometimes they don't quite fit the threads right. If not, I have other mounting screws that we will be able to put in. Okay, so I've just cut the drive shaft. Now I don't know if you remember seeing or if you'll be able to see it in the video, it was a little bit thinner up top where that fitting went over before, so I actually just cut that whole section off and then ground down each side because it's a little bit thicker here on the rest of the shaft. Now I also did the motor, and now the motor and the shaft, I use a Dremel grinding wheel because it's a little bit bigger. Kind of helps clear out that void quicker, and then just really take your time, go real slow with it. But you can see now that this fits inside there real nice. Once that ends on it, it's going to keep it from moving back and forth like this, but it keeps it now. There's no way for it to spin. Now I have not cut the shaft of the motor down any. I actually just kind of hit it out the top, and you'll see there's a little Allen key up here on the top. You just kind of back that out. So now when I go to assemble this, I can get the height of it just right inside the motor. So that way I'm making sure that it's making a better contact. It's not just on the end of it here like this, you know, that way it's all the way in there. I don't want it too far because I don't want it pushing it down into the motor, into the lower unit, so I want it to have a little bit of a space. Just a little bit of space where maybe it can ride up and down a little bit freely, because this is not a perfectly machined outboard. Plus, it also has a little bit of play in this bottom hub. So you want to make sure that it kind of allows itself to have a little bit of play. You're not putting any force on anything. Next, I'm going to shim the lower unit, and this can be a little bit tricky. You don't want too many shims in the back of the gear because you don't want the gear pushing into the drive shaft. You do not want it, you know, you want it to be real smooth and comfortable. You don't want it pushing or pull, or, you know, you don't want it too far away, otherwise it could strip, because the prop's going to create pressure to want to push it back because the prop's on that front end there. So you don't want to pushing too far, because it's also going to mess up the top of the drive shaft. You're going to move like this. And then if your motor pulls this back this way, now these gears are running together real hard, and you're just going to wear them right out. So we're going to get that shimmed. And another thing is, I also usually fill my gear cases. I usually just use like a marine grease. I mean, you could use any grease really. In all reality, it is going to leak out around the prop shaft when the lower unit's spinning, when the motor's running. But you also have the oil hold. You can oil it through there if you think it's running a little rough. But I prefer to use the marine grease because it's waterproof. It kind of holds itself in there a little bit better. But I'm going to get a little bit more put together here, and I'll add another video right after this. Okay, so we shimmed the gearbox. It took about 10 shims of these 0.10 shims. They're very, very thin. But it's 10 shims that went in the back of the gear case, which I know is again going to be hard to see. You can kind of see in there I have the drive shaft gear in here as well. The hub's still got to go on the end. It's also got to get filled with grease. That's pretty much ready to go. So the motor, we cut that slit in it, and now we have a ring on the outside which has, I had to file the Allen key down because there isn't that much clearance in the motor. You can still use it, but I just filed it down. You see I have another ring underneath here. Well, the reason for that is because the bell of this motor, this top half of the motor that spins, if there's nothing holding it there, it's going to want to come up, because all that's holding it down is the magnet. So if you were running this and running it and you hit some bumps and stuff, or for some reason it came up, it's going to come right off your drive shaft. So it helps to have a spacer. And in this scenario, because I cut that little top off of the drive shaft, that's why this is so long. Sometimes it's like the other one that I had. Sometimes it's like this one, and it's really tight fit, and all I do is really put a washer underneath here to protect the ball bearing on the bottom of this motor. So my next step is fill the gear case with grease, put the end on, put the screw in for the drive shaft, and then we're going to mount this motor. We'll see what we get. Might have to cut the top off this motor. I don't know if it's going to fit underneath the hood. We'll see. It's really not that much hanging out, so I think it should, but we'll wait and see, and I'll let you guys know. Alright, so now we're making progress. Motor is mounted. Pretty sweet. I was able to use the original screws up top here to mount the motor. And then now we got our screw in to hold the drive shaft in, and we got our prop nut on now. Well, I should say hub nut. So with these, because now that you've shimmed the gearbox out, you are probably not going to be able to send them in as far as they used to go. So what I do is, as I'm putting it in, I mean obviously it's got to thread in to some degree, so you thread it in pretty far, but I keep spinning the top of the motor as I tighten it, because you'll feel once it's pressing against that shaft, it's going to make some pretty good friction. So what you want to do is, once you get it to the point where you can't spin this as freely as before, you want to kind of back it out and maybe give it a little bit more than what you think it should. This should definitely be spinning freely, because again, there's no ball bearings or anything down there. You know, it can wear on that hub, so I would just back it out a little bit. But now you look at our prop shaft, and now we have a lot less up and down play, but we have almost no back and forth play. There's a little bit, and that little bit is really it just moving that drive shaft and that drive shaft hub. But it's just enough where when it's going, I'm pushing the shaft back because of the pressure of the propeller. You know, we're getting a really nice gear mesh in there, and those shims are alleviating a lot of that friction, but they're also keeping that gear mesh pretty tight and not allowing anything to slip or strip in that gear case. So I'm going to thread the prop on, and then we're gonna try and mount the hood, I think, next. Hopefully it fits. If not, we gotta take the motor back off, cut down the top of the shaft here, and hopefully in a little bit we'll have it running in a little cup or something so you guys can see the difference in power. Alright, so we've come outside for this part of the video. Everything's hooked up, the speed control's hooked up, it's all wired up. We're going to run it off this 2-cell for now just because it's the closest battery I had, so I just grabbed it. Here's the receiver, Spectrum receiver. This is my controller right here. So we're going to run the motor, and we're going to run it and kind of just slowly go up to the speed since we're testing it for the first time. This thing is definitely going to blow all the water out of this cup, so that's why we're going to kind of take it slow to start with. But here we go. So that's a little less. Here's about half throttle. That's full throttle right now. Running pretty smooth. But it is pushing all that water out. Well, there you guys go. There's a video on how to do it. I know I didn't show you most of the hands-on work. It's pretty self-explanatory. You just, for the most part, taking screws out and making a couple cuts and a couple adjustments that I'm sure you guys would be able to make on your own. If you have any questions, definitely comment on the video. If you guys could give it a like, that'd be awesome. I urge everybody to check out the Antique Outboard Club. They have a special interest group that is Toy Outboards, that's run by Denny Cole, who also runs the Collecting Toy Outboards group on Facebook if you guys want to check that out. It's a really cool group, a lot of great people. You get to see some pretty interesting stuff. I hope this video helped some of you guys out. Like I said, if you have any questions, drop a comment. Thanks for watching.